Hello and welcome to Resonate, your backstage pass to how successful entrepreneurs, coaches, and consultants harness the power of storytelling, create authentic personal brands, and scale their businesses with smart systems. Today, I am so excited to be hosting somebody who graciously invited me onto her own podcast as well. We have Michelle Rios. Now, Michelle is a transformational coach for entrepreneurs, coaches, and CEOs, often who fall into that high achiever category and are looking for something a little bit more than the traditional form of success that many of us have been sold. More on that later. She is also the host of a top 2% personal development podcast called Live Your Extraordinary Life. And today we are really unpacking this concept of authenticity, which has got a bit of a buzz around it at the moment. It's something that many of us are aspiring to live. However, putting that into practice in real life can raise a whole host of questions. How do we do it? At what point is it oversharing? What if myself is not accepted in the environment that I'm in? What is the limit between being professional versus showing up in a terrible mood or all these other things? So there are some of the things that we are going to be discussing. But where I want to start, Michelle, is what does authenticity mean for you?
Ooh, well, first of all, thank you so much, Shannon, for having me on the show. I am so excited to be able to share and be part of your audience's journey. So thank you. So authenticity to me really goes back to the origin of the word, which means the genuineness of something, right? Like when you get to the essence, whether we're talking about a brand, whether we're talking about a product, or we're talking about a person, we're really trying to understand more about the essence behind it. And so when people talk about how do I show up as my most authentic self, unfortunately, most of us, and I would say probably 99.9% of the population has undergone so much social norming and social conditioning that sometimes it's really hard to understand where that conditioning ends and we start. And part of the getting to the heart of the matter, whether you're building a brand or you're really just trying to understand how to build your best life, is really getting to the heart of who you are. What is your shared experience in humanity? What is it that really makes you tick? And what is it that you want to build the entirety of your business and I would argue your life on, right? And so that's really the essence of what we talk about when we talk about authenticity. The ways of getting there are multitude, right? There isn't one path to authenticity, but there are some really great practices we can talk about.
Yeah, let's come to that. But first, what do you think of this definition? I personally am a fan of Brené Brown. I remember that somebody sent me her TED talk back in, gosh, I think it was 2014 when I was at university in London. I was on the treadmill at the gym because I was at this stage of my life where I could not unplug, living a million miles an hour. More on that later. But I remember being so marked by this TED talk. And she said of authenticity, it is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we actually are.
100%. I get goosebumps every time I hear that quote because that's exactly it. There's a lot of shoulds, right? Like as soon as you hit a certain age, we should be tying our shoes at a certain age. We should be reading at a certain level. We should like a certain thing. We should want to become X. We should want to go into that profession because we're good at X, Y, or Z. But the shoulds don't really define who we are. They are social conditioning, they're family beliefs. They are usually things that are we see out there in the world and we think, "Oh, that's what success is, how it's defined." So, of course I need to do that. And the other thing I find is a lot of people end up making decisions based on things they're good at. But here's the problem with that. We are often good at many things. That does not mean that we should build our lives around it or our careers necessarily. I happen to be a good tennis player, not good enough to be a world champion. I could have gone in that direction, said, "Hey, let's go become a tennis instructor and teach little kids and what have you." But my heart wasn't in it, right? And I find that a lot of people get stuck in the what am I good at? Or what is it that is celebrated out in the world? And then let's build the brand around that instead of asking themselves the critical questions. What is it that really drives you? And
Mm.
often it's not the pretty things. The alchemist in you, the part of you that can take a traumatic experience or even a negative thing and turn it into a brand or a business, is a work of beauty. And people overlook that. How can I have taken, I have a good friend who was chronically ill for more than a decade, in and out of doctors, couldn't get to the heart of what was going on. Today, after ignoring a lot of the advice that she got, she ended up leaving her corporate practice and becoming a wellness advocate. One of the most successful people I know, has her own brand and line of food items for people who suffer from similar conditions as her. And she's passionate about it. But if you had known her back in the day, you would have thought, how would she possibly make a business out of something that she was so miserable around? And yet,
Mm.
out of that, she built this amazing brand.
Yeah, that is amazing. And it does go back to this concept of letting go of who you think that you are supposed to be in order to embrace who you want to be. And
Yeah.
let me tell you, I did so many interviews on starting over before this podcast became Resonate, where I heard a different angle on that same theme. And there were so many people who either were forced to wake up to how that they were living inauthentically or out of alignment with who they actually wanted to be and what was bringing them joy and happiness, and had an accident or a loss or some kind of difficulty they had to overcome. Or alternatively, they climbed this so-called ladder of success, got somewhere near the peak, and then realized that they were faced with an enormous sense of emptiness. You know, I remember speaking to an Australian executive coach, Joe Wagstaff, who is now a leadership coach and speaks a lot also on authenticity. And she said, I had climbed up to the peak of the peak in the financial industry. She said she had this beautiful house or apartment overlooking Sydney Harbour, the Opera House, all in just everything that at least Australian society had told her, this is success, this is the pinnacle, this is it. And she
Yeah.
said, I looked at myself in the mirror, caught the that glance where you really look into yourself and you go, who am I, what am I doing? And she said it forced her to really shift things in her life. And I think beneath that there are some signs, and maybe you can speak to this, Michelle, actually, because I'm curious about what are some of the signs that people will have if they aren't living authentically. What can people
Oof.
look for?
Well, first of all, the story of the executive coach and leadership coach is so relatable. I think it's something that a lot of people experience. And I think when I talk about being out of alignment, you almost inevitably feel this bodily resistance, like within you, a physical reaction to whatever you're experiencing, and you're pushing through anyway. You know, a lot of people talk about it, and I certainly do. Like, I felt like I was pushing a boulder uphill every day, up and down every day of my life during those years that I was really out of alignment and yet winning in the eyes of society. You know, I was checking boxes, I was making bank, I was doing all the things I was supposed to be doing or I should have been doing to succeed in terms of building a career in an industry that was going to be lucrative for me and creating status and having the right titles. And yet physically, I could feel it and I'd wake up exhausted, filled with dread. I would not be able to rest well at night. My head would hit the pillow and then my mind would just spin and spin and spin, reliving the moments of the day. There wasn't a sense of peace. And I often think that that's usually one of the first signs. It's in our bodies. Our bodies know, they carry the wisdom, and yet we ignore it, right? We caffeinate, we cope by eating more, we push it away. Some people end up with sexual addictions, like things to relieve themselves of what the body is trying to tell you. So I always say, like, how do you feel in your body? If you're not relaxed, if there's an anxiety that's constantly coursing through you, that you don't feel that sense of peace, there's likely a place in your life or perhaps throughout your life where you're not living authentically. You're out of alignment. And we have to understand why that is. What is it? I'll tell you, it wasn't the fact a lot of people said, "Oh, live your extraordinary life. That's easy for you. You've been living like, yachts in the Mediterranean and, beautiful mansions in the waterfront mansions. And you have all these amazing experiences." And I do. And I, I don't shy about talking. I'm not shy about talking about them. But there was a difference when I had them and I wasn't living in alignment and I just kind of felt like on edge all the time versus when they came as a result of living in a truth, even if it meant saying no to things that people expected me to say yes to, and they came to me. I attracted a lot more, even more extraordinary experiences when I got into alignment than when I was pushing boulders up hills and pushing through the day and not enjoying my relationships. In fact, my relationships became very disposable because they were actually probably trying to shed light on the fact that I was working myself into an early grave. I wasn't taking care of myself, but I was hitting all the status quo symbols that one would say, "Oh, she's very successful. Look at her car. Look at her house. Look at her bank account. Look at her clothes. Look at the places she goes." But yet, my relationships are a mess. I physically didn't feel well, and I didn't feel at peace ever.
What were you doing work-wise? Quick note. If you're enjoying the insights, stories, and strategies that we share here on the podcast, you are going to love my bi-weekly newsletter, Resonate. It's your backstage pass to everything we talk about here and more. I share exclusive tips on storytelling, personal branding, and how to build a freedom-based business that not only truly aligns with who you are, but also the life that you want to live. So if you haven't signed up yet, click the link in the show notes, quickly pop in your name and email, and you'll be directly on the list. Now back to the episode.
So I started out my career in management consulting. So I was recruited right out of university into management consulting in Washington, D.C. I ended up moving through that into public relations and was ultimately a public relations executive, worked in marketing, advertising, and public relations for 25 years in the end. But my awakening, if you will, to the fact that I was living out of alignment came fairly early in my 20s. I was on this very steep incline, climbing up the ladder quickly. I was one of the youngest VPs, one of the youngest SVPs, had a lot of responsibility, was globetrotting. It seemed very glamorous. And yet, behind the scenes, there were some telling signs, failed relationships, friendships that I didn't nurture. My health, again, was compromised constantly. And I thought that was in service of what I was trying to achieve. So it was okay. I was still young. And so all that stuff could come later. It was all right because work came first. And as somebody who's a high achiever, still, I have to often remind myself when I've been working in alignment toward a goal that holistically supports who I am. So, for example, I do a lot of coaching, do a lot of group coaching and individual coaching, and usually on how do you build a healthy business and sustainable business in a way that your systems are doing more of the work and you aren't, you are recognizing that your energy is your biggest asset, time and energy. And if
Totally.
those two are being compromised, you're not showing up. No matter what you tell me, you're not showing up as your best self. And I will challenge you every time. And yet, back in that time of my life, both my time and my energy were constantly compromised. They were to me expendable resources. I didn't see them as the assets that they actually are.
If you look back, I want to think about this more generally for people listening, but perhaps it's best to start with your own experience in this. What was one of the biggest obstacles that stopped you from becoming more authentic?
I think fear of failure. And for me, it was very tied up in money because I came from a very humble upbringing and money was tight. And so for me, the answer in my very youthful view of things was My parents are struggling financially. So if I have what they don't, which was financial resources and security, then a lot of the problems go away. Happiness will follow financial security. So for me, part of the authenticity process was decoupling financial security and personal success and authenticity. And I was dreadfully fearful that if I tried to become more authentic, it would come at a cost of my social status, my career status, and my financial status.
Mm. That's
Bottom
so
line.
powerful. And that is so honest. It really is. And I think so many people can totally relate to that. And especially people who are a little bit older, I'd say, who perhaps have had these thoughts that have been in the on the back burner of maybe I do want to, quit my job in corporate and become perhaps like you, an executive coach, or I want to follow this other direction, start a art business or open my own cafe or anything else that you feel like that is that soul call of something that you're pulled towards doing, but you go, no, 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 I can't do that because I have so much to lose. And yeah, and maybe this is a question that you have that you've agonized over or tackled in some respect, which is at what point is that just being a responsible person?
Oh, I've
Right?
I have grappled with that for decades. I will tell you, it's very important for people to know I did not become a coach or an author out of the gate. Like I had a very lucrative, long, sustainable career in an established industry in public relations, serving financial services, serving the chemical and energy industry, serving the automobile. Like I was across a multitude of industries. I had to go down the path of authenticity on more of a, what are they, the tortoise or the hare? I was the tortoise. I was going through this evolution while still in a very traditional career setting. And what happened was there came a point in time where I went from being the yes person. I was the atta girl. Give it to Michelle. She's reliable. She's trustworthy. She knows. You give her the hard clients. She can handle anything. She never says no. She will stay until the bitter end to get it done, and it will get done really well. And I was that person. I was the people pleaser, right? And I was not going to let anybody down until I realized A, that was killing me. B, people take advantage of that. And I
Mm,
still needed to feed myself. I was an independent single woman, realizing that you have to start to say no in order to actually be valued. And so part of my own process was, yes, I'll take that project, but no, I'm not doing it alone. And no, it won't be under these conditions. And no, I can't do it by that time. Here's what I can do. That
mhm,
became probably one of the biggest jumps I made in authenticity, which a lot of people hear the buzzword today, right? And they think, oh, she just like left corporate and became like a coach. No, like for me, it was a slower burn process. And I had to step into that next level of identity before I had the courage to get into the next one. Now, from the outside in, you might be like, I was constantly taking risks. I was like, I'll take that job overseas. Yeah, I'll take that over there. I'll do that. But from my perspective, it was still very calculated in the sense that, did I know I wanted to go speak on stages and write a book? Yeah, I kind of had it in me. Those were the whispers of my own personal soul, but I didn't see the ladder yet. I needed to live and have life experience and that career exposure to be able to say, oh, this is where this could fit in. And now I'm confident enough to reinvent with what I
yes.
know and what I've learned and what I'm going to take with me.
Mm,
So I often think when I find people who have had no career experience, right? They come right out of university and they're like, I want to go do this. I think there are two possibilities. Wonderful. It's sink or swim. You're either going to do it right off the bat and you've got the personality and the gumption, the persistence to invent yourself into it, or you really do need to go get some life experience. There's nothing wrong with going down the traditional path. I find it to be quite powerful to be able to look back on my experience and say, I've lived that actually. I do know how to respond to that kind of situation. I've gone through that, not once, not twice, but multiple times.
mhm.
And so then there's the other part of like, maybe it's not so bad to have a traditional career where you're kind of having to wade through the social conditioning and recognize your authenticity within it and find your way to courage to decide. You don't have to leave corporate to become your most authentic self. That happened to be my next calling. But for many years, I was the odd duckling within the corporate setting that sounded a little bit different, that made her way to the C suite by speaking her truth. But I had to be calculated. It wasn't going to be received right off the bat day one, right? You got to fit into the system a little bit in order to be taken seriously. And so there is something to be said about learning the culture of where you're at, knowing where the strengths are, and also knowing where the Achilles heels are and where it could be injected with some truth and know when to bring it up. You got to be strategic about these things. I didn't go in blowing up my career year two. I slowly gained confidence and credibility as an authority in my field, which gave me the latitude to be able to speak my mind and my truth as time went on.
Something I want to pull up in what you said was when I asked earlier, what was the biggest barrier towards you becoming more authentic?
Mm-hmm.
And you said, my fear of failure. I think any discussion about being authentic is you have to talk about fear. It will always be extremely linked to fear. And I think you can't be your most authentic self if it's fear that is in the driver's seat. I think that's a
Oh,
big
no.
difference, right? Like you're saying here, okay, my fear of failure, I have that all the time as well. Fear of judgment, like what is it that's actually driving you in these moments where you are not speaking up at work, where you are not saying no, you're being the yes person, where you don't dare to tell that story, where it shows you in a light that perhaps you wouldn't like as much, or you don't want people to have that impression about you. Just pause and consider if that it's really linked to a very present real fear.
100%. And it's so important that you're bringing this up because I would say, look, everybody is going to go on their own individual journey. For me, I would say my success in the early days, and I go back to age 7 when I talk about this, was 100% driven by fear. My fear of failure, my fear of letting people down and my family, the fear of having anyone be disappointed in me drove me to be successful and work incredibly hard to achieve things. And so then I got into this modality of, well, when I achieve things, then the door opens to the next thing and the door opens to the next thing. The problem with that is at some point there's going to be a reckoning. For me, it came in my late 20s where I was so fearful of dropping the ball that I never could let a ball drop. Now, I'm in a very different part of my life now where I recognize failure really is part of the process of becoming your most authentic self. You have to try things on. And I always say, is it really failure if you don't stop? Probably not. But back then, as a younger person, I would have said, well, anything less than an A is failure. I would have had this extreme view on it. I was this high achiever that said anything less than perfection is not worth doing. And it was an unhealthy reality for me that I lived for 20 full years before it really hit me straight upside the head. I was in graduate school, I was on a full scholarship, I was working full time, I was climbing the corporate ladder. I had been able to get away with cutting corners on sleep and eating and all of that because I was young and what have you, but eventually caught up with me. And when I didn't even know, because we're going back now 25 years ago, what depression looked like. I couldn't even I wouldn't have been able to tell you that that's what was happening. But slowly, But surely that facade of everything is perfect. I am fine. I can do it all. No worries. Absolutely. There's nothing I can't do, because if I let them know there's something I can't do, maybe they won't let me do it anymore. Maybe they'll find out that I don't know what I'm doing. I'm winging it. And there was such a deep-seated fear of like, well, if that happens, maybe they're going to go back to my small little town where there's nothing and I have nothing. It was these extreme views on what would happen if the other shoe fell or dropped. And then the other shoe dropped. I got to a day in my life where I could not physically get out of bed because I had gone through this I was going through a debilitating depression. I couldn't tell you that's what it was, but that's exactly what it was. My soul was crying for a level of freedom and release that I wasn't allowing it. I'd be like, pipe down, quiet, we're fine, everything is good. And at the same time, my body was tired. My mind was tired. I wanted to go be a young 20-something. Instead, I was totally buttoned down, wearing the suit, showing up as a power broker, seat at the table with people much older than me, making decisions. I wanted to be young. I wanted to go do crazy things. And I was like, well, that's great for you, but I wasn't born with a trust fund. And my parents are depending on me to be successful because I have younger siblings and there's a lot on the line. So I carried a
Too much
tremendous
pressure.
amount of pressure
So much pressure.
until it all blew up in my face.
Mm.
And I had to be really honest. I said, I can't do it this way anymore.
Yeah.
Something has to give.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you said before about these shoulds, because it makes me think of a recent conversation I had with a client, and it was a connection call. So it was before she became somebody I work with. And I heard so many shoulds in the discussion. I should be improving my storytelling. I should be able to communicate like this. I should be able to. And at some point I paused and I said, what would it be like if you did this with joy? What would it be like if you learnt from a place of genuine desire to improve rather than this self-flagellating, I must be further ahead, I am perpetually behind? And it's funny because I immediately detected that in her because I immediately detected it in myself. I have always been that person too. And I think I've made some steps forward in that space, which is what enables me to recognize that and to coach people through that, as I'm sure that's also the case for you, Michelle.
Oh,
And
yeah. It's
and
a
I think,
common trait in high
oh,
achievers.
it absolutely is. It absolutely is. And knowing you're not alone and that this is a very common experience, I think can really help as well.
Yeah, for sure.
A little shift in perspective here. I was listening to a podcast with Seth Godin. So he's very known in this marketing world, and he came out with a fierce attack on all things authenticity. And I wanted to bring it up because I want to hear your perspective on this. So he said, people do not need or want authenticity. This is buzzing. This is in trending at the moment. However, it is not what we genuinely want nor expect. If somebody comes in and says they are bringing their authentic full self to work and they are in a bad mood, they are unproductive, they're not showing up, they're not performing to the standard that is expected, especially if you are on the receiving end of that as a paid client, that is not what you want. People don't want authenticity, they want professionalism.
Yeah, I don't disagree with him. Look, I don't want people to show up at my workplace or in my business and say, today is just going to be a day where I loaf around. I'd rather them say, I am not in a good place today. I probably need to not be here. That's a different conversation than being unprofessional and just sort of loafing around and hoping that the world won't notice, right? I do think that we misunderstand what it means to be authentic. To me, at this stage of life, being authentic means if I think that there's a business move we're making that isn't smart for the business, I need to speak up. If I'm holding on information about why I think this is not a good move, and I'm not saying anything because I want to fit in and conform, that's not right. I think it's less about And frankly, it wouldn't fit my persona to like show up and be lazy, because even on a quote unquote lazy day, I'm not a lazy person. Do I like to sit around and watch a movie and chill out and do all that thing? And yeah, of course. But my regular course of being is I feel good about my life when I'm being productive and in service. And so when I think about authenticity, particularly in the business arena, it's about making decisions about where you're going to apply your gifts and your time and your energy versus deciding, hey, I'm going to go into finance because I know that guys going into finance can make 7 figures in the first 5 years. And if I work until I'm 40, I'm going to bank like $100 million and then I can retire. To me, that wouldn't be authentic. I wouldn't really care that much. I'd be like, hey, the money's good, but like, do I really want to do what they would have to do day in and day out? Would that be authentic to me? Probably not. I also am not going to be the person that chooses probably a very low paying career because it wouldn't fit the lifestyle I enjoy. So I do think when we talk about authenticity, I don't ever expect that I'm going to be unprofessional, but I'm going to be honest. Is today not a great day for me to do that particular project because of X, Y, and Z reasons? When is it due? Is there something else that can be done instead? Or could somebody else be working on this until I can bring my best self to the table? That's a different conversation. And as an executive, there's been many a time where I've had to make a decision because somebody didn't want to tell me they were going through something. And so they showed up, led the project into the ground because they were afraid to speak their truth. My marriage is going through the rocks right now, and I'm not getting any sleep, and I am stressed. I'd rather you tell me that in private and that we professionally handle that than pretend everything is okay. That to me is inauthentic.
And that's also going to give the person not withholding that message, that's ultimately going to make them feel better as well. Even if in the moment that they say it, they will experience a deeper seated discomfort, especially if you don't have the habit of having those conversations, of being honest and opening up about the things that make you very real and human.
And I think that we tend to sugarcoat it. Like, let's be honest, as a businesswoman who's led big global teams, it's not like I'm not going to be disappointed when the plan doesn't go according to plan, right? So if someone comes to me and says, I'm going through a marital difficulty or whatever the thing is, the truth, this is why I am not performing at my best. Okay, how are we going to solve this now, knowing that you're probably not the best person to be in it at this moment? I still need to solve the problem. So help me solve the problem. That's your level of professionalism too, right? You come to the table and saying, I don't think I'm the right solution right now, but let's get together and figure it out, because we still have a business that we are in service to. We still have people that are relying on us. But to me, to be able to be honest about what's happening in your life is important. Does it mean there are no repercussions of that? No. You might be like, this might not be the right career for you long term. Like, obviously we make adjustments and we do what we need to do. But if you're a perpetual state of chaos and that just becomes your life, the way you live your life, that might not be the right place, right? You might have to have different conversations with people. But I would say when people are honest about whatever they're going through or whatever they like, we can usually build a plan for everybody to win. And that's what I think we're trying to do here, right? Like,
Yeah,
we shouldn't
agreed.
say every day is rainbows and unicorns in the world of business, because it's not, whether you're an
Unrealistic.
entrepreneur or you're in corporate.
Yeah. On that though, I do want to turn towards building an authentic personal brand. So for all the people listening who are in that space, who are entrepreneurs or coaches or consultants, and they recognize that they do want to be a little bit more real in how they show up. Let's talk about that. I do think that if you want to resonate with an audience, to use the term of this podcast, whether that be in personal branding and in business, the message that you share should be real, relatable, and human. So on this with storytelling, stories, they are almost like the shortcut to authentic connections. And they really can be. However, I think what's really powerful is knowing if from a business perspective, where can other people see themselves in your story? I think that's the key thing, and why a lot of people will steer away from storytelling at first. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how other people will relate. Do you have any experience in this or any views on this?
Yeah, I mean, from a personal brand perspective, I'll tell you about my own reinvention because little did I know, we all think that we're unique and that our own experience, no one could possibly know what I've gone through. And of course, there could be nothing further from the truth. The reality is, if you're going through it, more than likely, many other people have or are going through it. So for me, as somebody who had been in corporate for a long time, who had been sort of like the rising authenticity guru within that world, I started to see a pattern for me, which was when I spoke my truth in my mind after becoming a credible, authoritative voice in the business, more people came to the table going, I need to talk to her. Is she on this project? Can she be part of it? So I became this CEO whisperer of sorts. I was coaching without having a coaching credential, if you will. I was within this business setting. And I was finding like more people wanted to talk to me about their business problems, what was going on. 9 times out of 10, and what helped me make the transition was saying, look, I spent so many years hiding behind conforming to whatever I thought the business expectations were and not actually telling you what I really thought, that I actually lost opportunities. And so now my whole business, for the most part, is based on helping people make transitions as entrepreneurs building new brands or people in corporate trying to make a transition, recognizing that usually in the pain of their learned experience is something very powerful to build a brand on. For me, authenticity became the gateway because I spent so many years out of alignment, not being authentic, that I can spot it a mile away. And I can tell you right now, like I get people coming in going, what do you think of my brand colors? What do you think of my messaging? And I'm like, it's beautiful. It resonates and it's not you. And they're like, what? But everybody's buying this and this. Great that everyone's buying it, but you are not going to be able to hold it up for a long time. I can sell cars too, but I'm not out selling cars, am I? Like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. It isn't going to feel good to you for a little while. So, yeah, you make a sale. Yes, you get a client, but for how long? Because it's not based on either A, your lived experience. So, it's not something you've gone through or lived, or it's not based on a passion or knowledge. It's just something that you've seen that draws you in. That's not enough to build a brand on. It's not. I can slap some pretty colors on something. I can sell something tomorrow that's not me to prove a point. Do I want to do that after a while? No, because it's not really me and I'm going to get bored and I'm not going to be able to stick to it. And that's what people don't understand. Too many people are coming to the table building brands because they've seen somebody else do something and they think, well, I can do that too, without taking into consideration their own lived experience, personal knowledge, or their business knowledge and where their passion lies, because it matters. Use that in service to somebody else. That's where the value is going to be derived.
And it's where the fulfillment arises as well. It makes me think of this quote, the magic is found in your mess. I don't know who said that, but I think there's so much truth in that. I see so many people who are building their businesses who will continuously think they need to up level in qualifications. Now, I'm not saying that it's not important to have qualifications and to be knowledgeable in what you're doing and have that strong skill set. Of course, it's important. However, it is not going to be the key in what distinguishes you from other people, especially when you are working with people who don't have the faintest idea of what the difference between this and this exact thing is. I was having this conversation the other day with a therapist, actually, or psychologist, I should say. And she was thinking of going and getting one more certificate in some other thing. And I said, I don't think that's really where you should be focusing. For one, most people have no clue what the difference is between a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a therapist, a counselor. No idea. How about instead of all of that, and instead of this perfectionism fueled desire to achieve one more thing, how about we look at your personal story? How about we look at this so-called mess where we do find your magic? Because I guarantee you that is going to be that real, relatable human place, the ideal client for you. Well, they'll be drawn to you. That's the thing. They'll be drawn to your energy. I found this so much in myself the more that I started speaking about my perfectionistic tendencies and self-sabotaging tendencies and
Yeah.
holding myself back in various ways. And then people be like, oh my gosh, Shannon, I can so relate. Like, that's exactly what I'm going through. How did you find the courage to start your own business? How did you?
Yeah.
And it just gives so much more heart in and amongst all of the knowledge, the brain stuff, right? I think it's a nice combination.
Yeah, you just hit on something so incredibly important. And it goes back to something I mentioned earlier. You have two assets that are the most important assets you have, and people overlook them. And that is your time and your energy. And I don't mean energy in the sense of do I have the vitality to do something? I mean, when you show up to a table, are you a magnet for what's happening around you, or are you repelling? Because you're doing one or the other. And those are based on very simple psychology. You're either operating out of fear. I want to fit in. I want everyone to like me. I want them to think I'm perfect. And therefore, you're actually unknowingly self-sabotaging and pushing people away. Or are you doing it from a place of love? And I use that, lowercase L. I'm not talking about romantic love, but like a true passion for what you're talking about or doing, or even having the understanding that your lived experience, as messy as it may be the antidote for somebody else hiding still behind the perfectionism, right? Or whatever that is. So your ability to say, hey, I am going to, and this is where I think authenticity has its best qualities, bring down my wall enough for somebody else out there to feel my energy, because I am so passionate about storytelling and why and how it can move the needle if you know how to tap into it. Let me show you how to do that in a way that's going to blow your mind, because you're not going to have to go spend 5 more years getting another degree that no one really cares about.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. I had this the other day, the exact thing you're describing. I hosted a corporate workshop at my home, and I remember there was this moment where I was speaking with the person who engaged me in this space, and everyone else was doing group work. And I said, you know, I I so love what I do. And he turned around, he said, it just shows.
Yeah.
You're just radiating, you know? And I think there was something in that, and him almost holding up the mirror for me was so powerful, because then it made me pause and feel that exact moment, not just saying the words, but actually feeling and making that connection between what I was saying and what was truly going on underneath. And then I realized I need more of this. This is what I need to do. And in fact, when I thought of what do I want for 2025, I made a vision board, and one of the things I put on there was this vision of my space and more corporate workshops and more community, because I realized that was the place, with me being more authentic, that brings in the joy and the aliveness and the energy I want to show up with in the world. And where time, speaking of your element here with time, it just flows. There's
Yeah.
just an ease, and there's a sense of being fully present and in the moment. And there was such a stark contrast from things that I'd had previously tried to do, where I felt like, go to use your expression before, like pushing a rock uphill. Like, everything was difficult. I spent more time in frustration. I was a dimmer version of myself. I didn't access that part of myself that was really in flow and energized and happy. And I
Yeah.
think that is something, now that I have experienced this, I know how it feels in my body, and I'm sure you do too. I'm so passionate about people finding this in themselves and living that, and finding the ways that they can do that in business, at work, in life, in their relationships, and in this whole holistic way.
Oh, it's so beautifully said. And I think you mentioned something earlier that I think is just a really nice ending to that part you just shared, which is the joy piece of this. So many of us are conditioned to believe that for something to be worth our time and energy and effort, it must be hard. And there's something society passes us down. Well, if it's not hard, it's not worth doing. And if you
Or I
didn't
don't deserve it.
suffer, yeah, if you didn't suffer, then is it really valuable? And here's the thing. I've lived both. I don't deny the fact that there will be times that will be trying, particularly when you're doing something new. You're building your own business, you're expanding, you're scaling. It can be very challenging. So it's not to negate from that. But when you can find moments that you build where you are literally shining your light and holding up a mirror saying, "Hey, I'm shining my light so that you recognize that you can shine yours." Like, the work is done. That's where the flow happens. And then you find, oh, wait, I now have repeat business. I now have a new customer that came out of this, or a new client, or a new opportunity. That's the place where I think most of us, when we talk about authenticity, we're talking about getting to this place where there is ease. It doesn't mean it will always be easy. In fact, think about the courage it takes to be able to open your home, let virtual strangers in, host a workshop, and hope that there'll be a moment of transformation or change, or something will transpire, though you'll be the alchemist of that activity, that they'll want more of you. There's no guarantee that those things are going to be successful. That requires a level of courage to step into that most people are going to say, I don't know. But the fact that you're willing to do that, and then you recognize, ooh, that feels good, I'm going to do more of it. You'd now say, oh, Michelle, it's the easiest thing in the world. I'm like in my own home. I'm operating from a place of ease. But to get to that place where you had the confidence to say you could pull that off is not easy. And that's where
No.
people forget. They think, oh, well, you know, Shannon's talking about something that's so, filled with ease. It must be easy. No, no, no. Two very different things.
I love that you highlight that. And to give the full picture actually on that story, the day before I did my first ever from home retreat, I was so
Mm.
sick. I woke
Oh,
up in the middle of the night. I was anxious and I think I even vomited, which I had never ever done before. And what was interesting in that, I look back now and I said, why was I was freaking out so much? I think there was a level of anxiety, but I pushed through it. And at the end of the day, after it went well, I said, what on earth was what was I so worried about, quite honestly? But I think it was everything coming to the surface about my fear of failure the first time ever doing something. It's
100%.
completely unfamiliar. I don't know if it's going to go well. I might be judged by these people. All of that came to the surface. And I think what I love in what you just mentioned is not perceiving discomfort as a reason to not continue. I think it's having that courage to step over that, to face that discomfort and that fear, and then open yourself to the possibility of something, the ease or the joy that comes afterwards.
I think that's so important. I was given the opportunity, a speaking opportunity in Nashville a few months back, and it was a fairly big national stage. And I'd done many, many speaking gigs before that one. And there was something about that one, though, that had me nervous. And I was running this story through my mind that says, well, what if my stories don't resonate? What if they don't find it compelling? What if, and I had ran this thing through my head. So, I was trying to control all these external factors. And here I am, somebody who recognizes that there's nothing worse than trying to control these. Like it's a surefire way of everything coming unraveled. I finally had to get to a point where I was like, well, this might not go well. Like literally, that's what I was saying to myself. Like, this might not go well. I should have low expectations. Whatever happens, happens. I have the courage to show up. That's enough. And I had to just kind of operate in that space initially. Okay. By the time I got on the stage and I started to tell my stories and I started to connect with the audience and I let go of the fear. First of all, I couldn't see anyone because there are major spotlights on me and it's a completely dark auditorium. So you don't see anybody. And all of that melted away. And I just had a conversation with the one person I could see in like row 4, clearly. It was amazing. And it was the most uplifting, validating experience of stepping through fear and worry and anxiety and fear of being an imposter, what have you, and recognizing the stories that you dare to tell and share often are exactly what somebody who's sitting there needed in order to take their next step. Maybe not be your next step, but their next step.
Totally. A couple of things in that. One, and I say this regularly to people who often have fears about speaking in public. One would be you then prioritize connection over performance. And that's huge. It's shining the focus not on yourself, which is what happens when we're so obsessed with this judgment or this possible judgment or sense of failure. Instead, how can you be of service? That's something I say on repeat. And I think you just illustrate perfectly why that works. And the second, if this comes up in the context of social media, of recording a podcast, of anything where you have to put your voice out into the world, something I have to remind myself of, because I also feel these things too, is imagine you're just talking to one person. Imagine instead of you having this camera right in front of your face and it could go out into the world and who knows who could see it and all of it's scary, deer in the headlights. No, you're talking to one person who really, really needs to hear your message. That immediately, I think, will take off that armor, that baggage, and bring you more naturally into your authentic self.
100%.
Michelle, it has been such a pleasure speaking with you about this. I can see we are both on the same page about sharing this message about authenticity with the world. And I want to encourage everyone listening to go and check out Michelle's podcast, To Live Your Extraordinary Life. She also has a book coming out, which I believe, well, Michelle, you can tell us when that is.
Yeah, it was due out this winter, and it's going to be pushed to a little bit later this spring. So, Shannon, we'll have a part 2 when we can talk more about it, but it'll be out later this spring, and I cannot wait. And then we'll have a book tour, so maybe we'll do some stops over in Europe at some point too.
That could be fun. Authenticity Principles, is it titled?
Yeah, it's The Power of Authenticity, a blueprint for living your extraordinary life. But it's based on, there are 8 authenticity principles that we talk about in the book.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, I've enjoyed every minute of it, Shannon. Thanks so much for having me on the show.